Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews, the podcast where we take a look at films from our youth and ask the age-old question of, is that any good? This week we went to one of my childhood favourites, Small Soldiers, a film that as I said last week, I did not suspect held up. It was an interesting choice. It was a choice I held off on for the reason that I was not confident that it would still be good. So, with that in mind, do we jump straight in, Chris? How do you want to do this?
Well, we'll do history, because I do have a weird one with this.
Where have you discovered that you did actually see this as a child and had just forgotten?
No, I knew I hadn't seen it, but basically, I can't remember the full details of why I felt the way I felt. But I'm pretty sure, and it might have been another movie, but I'm pretty sure it was this one. Mm-hmm. I rented this from the library and put it in and started watching it. And I just remember feeling weird about it. I remember thinking, oh, this isn't the movie I thought it would be. And then I remember looking at the cover and going, oh, this isn't the movie I thought it would be. And this seems odd. And I just say, fuck it, and just turning it off and just not watching it.
So
and I
funny.
think because I wasn't freaked out this time, but I did the same thing happened this time because I went. Because I've never watched the trailer for this movie. I only know of this movie through the poster, which is quite iconic in my mind. Not iconic, but at least memorable. I could have described the poster to you without ever having seen the movie. But because that's my entire knowledge of this movie, I assumed it was an animation. So my theory is what happened as a kid was this live action movie starts, and I go, oh, that's weird. That's not what I thought it was. Yeah, well, just don't watch it. And yeah. I'm pretty sure I rented the movie and just didn't ever watch it.
Yeah, that's super interesting because the poster that you're referring to, I guess, is the blue background one, and it's a small soldier at the top, and it's got the main Tommy Lee Jones voiced character with his hand out. Originally he was supposed to be holding a gun, but they took that out. Holding his hand out like he's reaching out, and then behind him is Archer, that character. And there are no human characters at all in this image, and there's no real background at all to it. It's just a blue space. So it does make it does create the impression it's a live action movie. Just the poster.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, an animated movie. I should say. Sorry.
I've googled VHS, and I assume I had the option of looking at the back of the movie, which. Yes. But I can't remember all the details. There's a possibility it's not even Small Soldiers that I'm talking about, but I feel like it was. That's my memory. And yeah, I just remember being a bit like, no, this isn't for me, and just turning it off.
So I think there were a few revelations for me watching this again. But we'll just start with history. First of all, I just really liked this movie as a kid. There wasn't a huge amount to that story in that. I remember seeing the trailer, thinking it looked really interesting, like kind of like Toy Story, but like live action. So, but also like with a darker edge because they're coming to life and it's like dangerous. And it also evoked of a movie that I really loved called Toys, which is a Robin Williams movie where the military try to take over a toy factory and turn the toys into weapons, and Robin Williams is the guy that owns the toy factory trying to stop it from happening, and in the end he has to fight a bunch of like toys that are trying to kill him. It's like a weird movie. We'll cover that at some point, I think, because I have vivid memories of that movie too. But I was bringing that to mind, like, and I remember thinking like, oh, this looks cool. Like this just looks cool. It's like an action movie with these toys that come to life. And I remember watching it and really enjoying it and not having any idea of the real actual thing that is just apparently, Chris, I'm just a Joe Dante fan. I didn't know this.
And can I just say, yeah, go on.
Well, I didn't know this is a Joe Dante movie, Chris, until yesterday.
And did you know that from looking it, or like me, did you watch the movie and go, pretty sure this is directed by the guy who directed Gremlins?
I saw his name in the credits, so I realized quickly. But But it's so interesting, Chris, because like clearly I just liked his vibe. Because I also, one of my other childhood favorites, again, one we probably will get to on this, but we haven't covered yet, a film called Inner Space, which I absolutely adored as a child, and that's less, small things coming to life and attacking a town. So it's not quite got the Gremlins and Small Soldiers vibe, so to speak. But it's also a Joe Dante movie, and I think for whatever reason, his movies just entertained me as a child. I think there's something about the tone, doing a sort of family movie with a dark edge that clearly just was my jam, right? Like that was just my thing. Whatever his sensibility was, it appealed to me because I had no idea that this was also a Joe Dante movie until I started watching it yesterday. And there were a couple of things that obviously his name's in the credits, but immediately I'm like, I should have known. Yeah, as Chris pointed out, it's very Joe Dante in its execution, but also it's got Dick Miller in it. Who was in Gremlins. He's in all of Joe Dante's movies. So, like, I should have, put it together. That guy's in all of Joe Dante's movies. There are so many clues. But I had no idea. And I was like, this makes so much sense to me.
I remember, this is going to sound like a weird tangent, but bear with me. I remember Charlie Simpson of Busted and Fight Star fame. Incredible vocalist. You can have your opinions on Busted. Charlie Simpson is a fucking brilliant vocalist that has range. And I remember he was on The Masked Singer here in the UK. And I remember going through, talking about it with my cousin, and we're talking about, clues for the different acts. And my cousin was just like, you know how I knew it was Charlie Simpson? And I'm like, how? And he just went, because it's Charlie Simpson. It was just the most obvious thing in the world. Yeah. And I think it's like this. It's like, how did you know it's a Joe Dante movie? Because it's a Joe Dante movie. Because there's a scene where the kitchen, becomes a war zone and everything in the kitchen becomes a threat. Because the aesthetic of it, because there's a boy that finds a mystical thing that comes to life.
And he befriends a good version of the thing he's fighting. Yeah. Oh, there's so much Gremlins in this movie for sure. So I loved it as a kid. I absolutely adored it as a kid. But haven't watched it in adult life. Sat down to watch it yesterday. Are we predicting? Because I'm pretty confident you didn't care for the movie, because I think it's I think even if I was coming in here today with positive thoughts, I'd still have to say not as good as Gremlins, which you didn't love. So I'm not expecting you to be coming in today with a glowing review. I don't think this is going to be a Last Action Hero situation. So we'll start with you. What did you think of the movie, Chris, overall?
To be honest with you, I think in a way I didn't love the movie. I didn't hate the movie either. But my biggest takeaway, Dan, is once again, as we've already discussed on our podcast on our Jingle All the Way episode. My biggest take is that we very tragically lost Phil Hartman too soon.
Yes,
because he made me laugh a lot twice in this movie. One, when he waves the white flags and refers to them as gorgonzolas.
Yeah.
I thought that was very funny. And then at the end, where he's like, no amount of money could make up for them. That'll do. With the check.
It's great. He's great in this movie. He's great in all movies.
For those, I'll just do it quickly because it is awfully simple. There's a toy company. They get taken over by a big fancy tech company, and the guy in charge wants to do more with toys. So they decide to take some soldier toys that one of the guys is developing, put a military-grade microchip in it, which brings the toys to life, and makes the commanders, the soldiers, go after what are they? I'm just going to call them gorgonzolas, but let's call them properly once. Gorgonites. Which in turn, the toys end up because of the guy who was in the Gremlins movies, right, as well. The delivery guy. The
delivery guy's the guy from the Gremlins movie. Yeah.
He gives some of the toys to this kid whose dad owns a toy shop, and then the kid and his neighbor end up caught up in the battle between the Gorgonites and the Commandos, and chaos ensues. And they kick some ass and they wreck some lives momentarily. And then I did like, there were a few things I like. Yeah, in the main, my headline thought would be, I didn't love it, I didn't hate it. There were moments where, despite some of the pure fucking insanity of this movie, and it's got it. I mean, it's hard not to feel like somebody involved had a Barbie fetish. Why don't they put their clothes back on, Dan? Why don't the Barbies get dressed again? It's weird. It's a weird scene.
It is a weird scene. It's a really weird scene. We'll talk about that.
It's a really weird scene.
It's creepy as hell, though. To be fair, like it's effective.
Oh, yeah,
If the idea was making me like creeped out, then it works on both levels.
Oh, yeah,
on both the I'm genuinely afraid of these things level, and also someone on this movie maybe had an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's creepy stuff. So yeah, I was mainly watching it. I was just almost, like I say, a little bit bored. And then, despite there being some fun moments, the plot I actually quite like. I mean, the plot's arguably just too A to B and simple, but I did also, especially in a world. This is a compliment I'll pay this movie. In a world where every film needs to be end of the world disaster, the threat in this film is, are one batch of toys gonna find and destroy the other batch of toys? Like that's their sole mission, and it intersects with these human lives, but it's not, they're not out to end humanity, or anything like that. And I did kind of I enjoyed the stakes of the movie actually.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Do you know what?
Because the most they scale it up is at the end. They say there are 16 Gorgonites now because they're now including humans in the Gorgonite count. So now humans are a target for these things as well. So I guess there's an element of these toys are essentially, that boils down to these toys will not be safe. So hopefully they can get them off the market in time.
Yeah, and even that to some degree, yeah. So there is that because they presumably, even if they destroyed them, they then, I imagine, they don't then go back to being toys. Even that, it's the humans we know. Like I did enjoy the notion of, no pun intended, taking a small story and making it big through the kind of action and what happens. I did think that was quite commendable. I'll say that's a headline thought. I think there are a lot of commendable ideas in this movie. A lot of it ripped off from Toy Story and Gremlins, but anyway, there's a lot of commendable stuff in this movie. I just don't think the execution is flawless.
No.
Yeah,
because I think that's kind of like, that's where I landed. Because I landed on there's a fun movie here, but it's caught between a more outright horror tone, like a Gremlins, that just commits to being basically a horror movie that kids can also kind of watch because it doesn't have any swearing or nudity in it, or overt gore. But it's also wants to be a family-friendly movie, this one, and because it's in the middle, it ends up not scratching either itch. I think it's too dark to be a completely family-friendly movie, but it's not dark enough to satisfy the Gremlins horror itch. So I just think it's all lacking, basically. None of the ideas are quite explored enough. The comedy isn't quite good enough. It's like the hit rate's poor. The character work is basically non-existent. So it's just, I think the headline thought, and this is really tragic, is just lacking. Like there is a good movie potentially in this, I think. Or at least a fun one, like a real romp-like type thing. Something that doesn't take itself too seriously, which is what Joe Dante is like a master of. We all saw Gremlins too. This is a man that does not take things too seriously when he doesn't want to. And I just think it doesn't quite... And it's not 100% Dante's fault, as we'll cover, because it feels like the studio wanted him to make initially the dark movie, and then continued to get nervous about that and pull back and pull back and pull back. Even, just in the editing phase, they were removing explosions, So it sounds like it wasn't 100% his fault that this movie has this mixed tone. But yeah, my headline for is unfortunately it doesn't really scratch any itch in the end. It's trying a few things and it doesn't really achieve any of them. So yeah, it's a nil point for me as well. So I think we should really start with the recommend don't recommend when we do the overall, just so people who don't want spoilers can either watch the movie or not. I'm gonna say not recommend on this one before we go into the full spoiler version of the movie.
I'm gonna say not recommend because even my usual like category. Well, you fit my usual category. Like last week for fuck did we watch
Flintstones.
The Flintstones. My recommendation was if you watched it as a kid and really enjoyed it, it would be worth revisiting, and you'd probably enjoy rewatching it. Whereas, like, I can't even give that sort of classic rewind reviews recommendation because you watched it as a kid and enjoyed
watched it and enjoyed it as a kid.
And didn't particularly enjoy it on this watch, so no, I am even if sometimes I can be more lenient, and not just because I didn't watch it as a kid, I'm not as lenient on this movie, and I would say not recommend.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there are good things within it we will talk about, but I just don't think enough to make up for its shortcomings. I think that's basically where I landed. Should we break it down a bit, Chris? Why not? Like a songwriter in the 90s that didn't know what to do with the bridge. We'll break it down.
Nice. I think of us as songwriters from the 90s in many ways.
Yeah. So let's crack into this. Let's start with the tone, because I think the tone is the biggest issue. And we'll talk about some of the specific scenes as we get through it. But like, did you think it didn't quite go far enough with the horror? Because I feel like the movie wants to be a horror movie, wants to have that Gremlins like tone, but it doesn't go far enough. Am I right in that, or did you feel that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one route to ramp up this. That's one route to define this movie a bit more. I think. Yeah, it's really weird. I think the weirdest thing about that is there are horror elements throughout the movie. There's kids getting kidnapped. There's these dolls getting dismembered by garbage dispensers. Mm-hmm. There's the weird, freaky, his brain gets inserted into Barbie's, which also seems to slightly break the. Oh no, because he does literally take the chip, I suppose. And then it's so I was on board with that actually until then. It was like, oh, it's all the Barbies through some weird sort of toy device. Okay, fine. You'd think if they'd got the intelligence to do that, they would know EMPs were a threat or something and combat that. I don't know. The logic breaks apart. There's no point going into that too much. It's all flawed logic. But you know, that scene of transferring the mind to the Barbies. There's lots of horror style scenes within this movie, and I think that you could go down a route of ramping that up more. I think you'd probably have to do more than just ramp up the scenes that already exist. You'd obviously have to add in other scenes of that nature. But yeah, I think definitely there's a world where you define the movie more by amping up the horror, for sure.
Yeah, because there's like the moment that I always think is like weirdly underserved, and because I think it's a very, very like, it's like a really, for me, even as a kid, I remember this, one of the most impactful moments, but it's lost because it's like, it feels like they edit around it quickly because they don't want to actually, get caught out by the ratings board on this one. But like the bit when he uses the, one of the toys uses the sort of device in the kitchen to cut the kid in the kitchen scene when he's trying to save Archer from being dropped into the food dispenser. They use like a weird, like electric, spinny pizza cutter thing. I've never seen a device like that in any kitchen, by the way. I don't know where that came from or what it was used for, but whatever. They use it to cut the kid, but it's really cut around. Like, and I mean, when I say cut, I mean like from an editing perspective, it's really sort of like avoided. But I think that's the first moment you realize these toys are really genuinely a threat to people. Because the stakes for the first half of the movie are, well, they're gonna plastic on plastic. This is gonna be some plastic toys punching some other plastic toys. What can they actually do to each other? They've got plastic weapons, and they do that joke where the Tommy Lee Jones soldier snaps the plastic gun in half and is like, standard issue won't be enough, and that's kind of funny, I guess, because then they're tooling up. But I was like, oh, what are they gonna do? They're gonna run at you with toothpicks. I don't know. It doesn't seem. And I will say the movie's creative later on with they use nail guns and other devices that they sort of jerry-rig to sort of make genuinely threatening seeming weapons. And the creativity behind some of that is good. One of my favorites is when they've got a gun that shoots out those little things you use to hold corn that you'd stick into the end of each corn that are shaped like little corn cobs. They start shooting those at the kid later, and they're sticking into his leg, and he's pulling them out. I thought that was a fun idea. But the moment when they saw that kid and he gets his arm cut, I was like, that should be a big moment, because that's the moment the movie should be turning and pointing out the threat. There's an actual threat, and because of the editing, they don't even get to revel in how that might make an audience feel. They don't get to lean into making the audience feel the horror or the shock of that moment. And because it is the turning point. It's the first time they physically hurt someone beyond I don't know, throwing small bits of plastic at them or anything. That's the moment. And I was like, that's crazy that the movie just kind of almost ignores that. So yeah, and that's just one small example. It's a macro. A micro version of the macro problem. It's an issue throughout the entire movie that they never quite commit to that idea enough. But that scene is a micro version of the actual issue. So yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling. I'm rambling on that point.
No. I agree, and to be honest with you, I don't think it just applies to the horror genre. I think you could amp up aspects of this to make it more comedic. You could make this film a live-action cartoon if you wanted to. You could, the scenes of the chase sequences, for example. You could make them more live-action cartoon, more comedic. You could make them incredibly action-based if you wanted to.
Yes.
And again, comedic that way. The Ant-Man style jokes of seeing something and it looking really epic and then panning out and seeing it larger. I think you could make it more of a family sort of, well, maybe not because of the whole fucking small soldiers element. But what they were trying to do with the romance between the two kids, which again I don't think is executed particularly brilliantly. You could play on that. Play on the dad starting out not really having any faith in his son and then punching the guy from the company because he tried to injure his son. You could ramp up those elements and make it more of a feel-good thing. Again, I think you'd struggle because of the fact that it's fundamentally about mini soldiers coming to life and fighting aliens and all that stuff. But I just think everything you've just said with those specific examples, you could pick any genre within this film and do the same thing. And whether that would save it enough to make it a better film, I don't know, which is why the word I keep using is defined, because I do think it would make the film more defined if you did that.
Yeah, and I think action's a really interesting point, because I actually think a lot of the action in this movie is quite a letdown. People versus toys is very hard to make exciting, because you really have to scale it up to make the toy feel threatening to a person. That entire last action sequence where the kid's hanging from the power pole, and it comes down to Archer versus Chip Hazard, I think is the Tommy Lee Jones guy's name. Let me check that. I'm going to check that because I'm going to feel bad if I get that wrong. It's not in front of me. Chip Hazard. I'm going to stick with Chip Hazard. I think that's it. Which is a funny name for a toy that's dangerous and a hazard because of his microchip. Oh yeah, it is. It's Chip Hazard. There you go. I've got the names in front of me now, so I'll hopefully be able to remember in future. So when Archer and Chip Hazard are fighting at the top of that power pole, and you're just like, well, the kid's right there. Like, he is hanging, I guess. That's how they excuse it. But, like, couldn't he just knock him off? Like, you could just knock him off. Like, you just punch him. Like, shove him. Like, he's a toy.
Yeah,
he's not got the...
It's the reasons the weird Barbie shit exists, because that exists so that you can have toys swarm the kids. And you have any sense of belief that, you know, this could have led to them being tied up and all that sort of stuff, which you still don't, really. Because you're still a bit like, surely with the right timing, you could potentially just chuck these off you.
And that's so I think a lot of the action scenes of this movie do let the movie down. I think the only point it starts to work is at the end, when we do the whole plot point that they find a whole truck of soldiers, and now there's hundreds of them. Because now we're playing into the thing I talked about when we reviewed Gremlins. What makes Gremlins scary to me is not the gremlin. It's the notion that once one gets wet, it becomes many, and once those get wet, they become many. And theoretically, if Gremlins were a real thing, the world would be overrun in days. You know what I mean? It would not be containable, realistically.
Yeah, I saw this thing. A good example. This is a fucking tangent, but I saw this thing on. I think it would have been a reel on some form of social media about how if you, I'm getting these exact numbers wrong, but it definitely was in the multiples of millions. About if you offer someone the choice between 5 million or 2p every day for a month, and it doubles every day, and actually doing the 2p option gets you more than the 3 or 5 million or whatever it is, because that's just it's just what happens as it doubles. Which this is a really weird tangent, but you know, it backs up what you're saying about, you know, the threat being the doubling and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because I think genuinely, like, that was a scary idea. The scene in Gremlins when the gremlin jumps in the pool, you understand how in trouble they are, because they've struggled with 5 gremlins up till that point, and now there are hundreds, thousands, whatever the number is, of these gremlins running through this town. So this movie has that moment, but one, it comes way too late in the movie. It comes with 30 minutes left, I think. They get a truck of the soldiers, open up all the boxes, and then there's slightly more threat at that point, because the numbers, they've surrounded the house. They have, and I don't know how they've managed this quickly, but they have somehow built all these vehicles. Some of them are just like designed to be vehicles. Like the helicopter he drives is just a toy helicopter, that like a remote controlled helicopter. That's fine. I'm not a problem with that. But a lot of these like vehicles, we saw them earlier in the movie, you sort of making in the garage, like, you know, like with the nail gun and all that stuff. We saw them making those. Where they get all the ones from the end of the movie, I don't know. But they all have like vehicles and projectiles, and they're shooting, you know, things on fire into the living room of the house and stuff. That's the closest the movie comes to having convincing action, and that is just because of the numbers. And even that isn't that convincing. Like the amount of times they just run away from the bullets and the bullets hit the thing behind them, and you're just like, okay, they're fine. And then you know the bullets are just a nail, and I'm like, that's gonna hurt, but I ain't gonna kill. Like, unless you get them in like the eye or something, and it goes into the skull. Like, this it will suck, but it will not kill them. Like, it's a nail gun. They'll be maimed. And I guess if you hit them a bunch because they go down, then yeah, you had blood loss or whatever. But it just doesn't feel like the threat it should. And I'm not saying like I want a movie where the toys are maiming people that far. But it's tricky to make me believe in the action of this movie and the threat of this movie, which is why I think maybe they should have done more of like them kidnapping vulnerable, like the small child, kidnapping and putting that child in danger. You maybe would believe more that they'd have a system for being able to like actually do harm, and therefore there'd be more stakes to it. But yeah, all the action scenes are just them running away from projectiles, because realistically, if you put them in any sort of like one-to-one situation with the toys, they're just going to flail and knock them off and run away. It's not exciting to watch. So instead, we just get the toys in vehicles firing things at them, which they run away from anyway. Like that's 90% of the action in this movie. So yeah, I think the action doesn't work, the horror doesn't work. It's all a bit flat, which is a shame. Let's talk about the characters. Is this the most boring fucking cast of characters a movie like this has ever had, or with the exception of Phil Hartman's character, maybe? Like, okay, let's just very briefly. Main kid, right? I'm supposed to believe this fucking vanilla, this vanilla bike riding, looking after his dad's shop kid was some bad boy at his last school that's been like kicked out of 1,000 schools. He does absolutely nothing on screen ever to make me believe he was ever that child. So is he lying? What's the story here? I don't understand. The what I'm told about this child and what he actually does on screen, very different.
Well, no, Dan, that's covered because he says, I'm a different kid now. He says that.
Yep. All right. Yep. All right.
It's bad. Like, I don't think it's necessarily, the actor's fault.
No,
the dialogue and the script and in this case, the way the characters have been plotted and their arcs. Particularly with this boy, like
what arcs?
Having this past, but this boy having this past and not doing anything. He doesn't even like kick ass in sort of the action scenes, or you know what I mean. He doesn't even like show himself there, really.
No.
It's mad. It's just really bad. The characters are all really, really badly written.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame because I love, but there's no triumph at the end when they kiss. You're just like, yeah, all right, whatever.
Yeah, we've ticked that box. Plot closed.
Even though part of you we haven't ticked that box down because part of you's going, where's her boyfriend?
No, Chris, he ran away earlier in the movie.
Did he run away? I thought he got caught.
No, it's so bad. Basically, right, this is what the movie wants me to think is happening, and then what actually happens. What the movie wants me to think is happening is she gets kidnapped by the toys. Her actual boyfriend, the biker kid who's supposed to be brave and cool, goes in, gets scared by the dollies, runs away, and runs out screaming and abandons her and leaves her to her fate and doesn't come back or try to help. The neighbor kid, who is brave and smart and great, then shows up and saves the day. And therefore, she loves him now, right? Because the other guy turned out to be a coward. And we already set up earlier in the movie that she's a bit unsure about the biker guy. So, okay, that's what the movie wants me to think is happening, right? But what actually happens is biker guy goes in, gets legitimately attacked by these dolls, does leave, admittedly does not come back, that is true, but when other kid returns, he gets immediately beaten, and Kirsten Dunst has to free herself and save him. Which I like, because I like female characters in movies like this having agency and being able to, hold their own.
Yeah, definitely.
But it does sort of get in the way of the plot they want me to believe, which is that of the two boys, she's going with him because he's the one that saved her.
Yeah, it's true. I have to say, Kirsten Dunst is doing a lot with very weak material.
Yeah,
she's really good.
Yeah, she is. She's great in this movie. To be fair, it's a good cast. I mean, look, Dennis Leary is amazing. David Cross is amazing. Jay Moore is fantastic. He's so funny in this role. Obviously, we always Dick Miller. I love Dick Miller as the truck driver. Kirsten Dunst we've already talked about, but and Phil Hartman we've already talked about. Robert Picardo has a small cameo as the guy that designed the chip, and it's fucking incredible. It's so fun. He's great in that scene.
Doctor Exposition. Yes, yeah, he's very good.
Wait, the guy who invented the chip, right? That's all offended that they're saying the chip is the problem. That guy.
Yeah, there's a lot of fucking exposition in that scene.
Yeah,
it just latches onto the software already there and all that bollocks.
It's
I'm not criticising him. I'm criticising the script. He does a brilliant job of it. It's one of the reasons you get away with it is his performance. But yeah,
I love Robert Picardo. I absolutely die on the Robert Picardo hill. So and even the voice cast for the toys. Tommy Lee Jones. As much as I have mixed feelings on Tommy Lee Jones as a performer, he's perfect for Chip Hazard. It's a match made in heaven. Like it's perfect. And you look down that list. Go on, sorry.
Huh? I feel like the only one we've not named there is Gregory Smith, who plays the main kid. Just to say, I genuinely think with a better script, that role would be better. I don't think the problem is him.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. No. He's perfectly fine with the material he's given, and he can't help it that he was given such a flat character. Like that's not his fault. Yeah. Not his fault at all. That he really had nothing he could do. He has the flattest character. Like every other character, I think has at least a moment. Like even his mum, I can't find the actress's name here. Here we go. Irene. No, Irene is the name of the character. Irene Abernathy, played by Anne Magnuson. The moment when she cracks out the tennis racket and starts fighting back and gives everyone instructions of what to do is brilliant. She has a scene where she gets to do something. Do you know what I mean? Kirsten Dunst's character has a scene where she gets to do something where she turns on her toys, the Gwendy dolls, and it's I always hated those dolls anyway. That's a fun moment for her. Jay Moore and David Cross as the two guys that sort of reluctantly made these toys in the first place. Their funny regret and the way they realize this and the bickering they do between them. They get stuff to do. Everyone in this movie has stuff to do except this poor kid, Gregory Smith, who is just there to be generic movie boy. He's nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's got nothing. It's really a shame. But yeah, even the voice cast of the various toys are doing a good job. You know what I mean? Like Christopher Guest and Michael McKean, Harry Shearer voice the Gorgonzolas, the Gorgonites. The bunch of the cast from the Dirty Dozen voice the soldiers, like Nick Nitro and all those guys. And also one of my favorites, and I didn't realize this until I got to the credits, the voices of the Gwendy dolls. Did you catch who it was?
No.
It's Sarah Michelle Gellar and Christina Ricci.
Got such a good voice cast.
It's incredible. It's so good. You couldn't I don't even know how you would assemble that cast today for any reasonable amount of money. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy. And we haven't mentioned Kevin Dunn yet, who plays the dad, Stuart. He's also great. He's perfect for that role. It's it just really fits his a guy that's been too stressed out and has left town because of the stress, trying to de-stress, but still often being very stressed. It's great. So everyone has something to do. It's not great, but it works mostly for them. That poor kid, he was doomed from the start. What a fucking flat vanilla pancake of a character. He would blow over in the breeze because he's made of cardboard, that character. So yeah, the character stuff doesn't work either. Shocker.
No, the character stuff. I think the character stuff is the worst thing about the movie. Yeah, I would say.
I would agree.
Let's talk, and I want to get your opinion on this because you're more into this element of stuff. Why am I struggling to get my words out? I think you have more knowledge about and are more into VFX. I would say than I do. So the VFX, does it hold up? Do you think? Was it good for the time? Where are we sitting on the special effects of it all, Dan, and these soldiers talking?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think this is one of those movies that's on that border where we were figuring out CGI and how CGI could be used. And I think they approached it with the right idea, which was to use puppets and toys on set. And there are several scenes that they're still puppets and toys. But then at a certain point, they've surrendered to scenes where it's just entirely a CG creation. And I do think when it's entirely a CG creation, it definitely gives itself away a little bit. I don't think it holds up very well because and honestly, if this movie had been made 2 to 4 years later, it probably would have been a lot better. Because 98, it's we're just still learning. You know what I mean? And I guess this would have been one of the first movies Joe Dante worked on with some of these tools. You know, I mean, obviously Jurassic Park 93, so we are 5 years from that. But I mean, it took a long time for this technology to not only filter down because of cost, but also for filmmakers to learn how to use it well. It's the same thing that's happening now with the volume. You know, this technology that Disney sort of pioneered on The Mandalorian, but is now being used in various ways, which is essentially a new version of rear projection, where there's a big screen behind them to create the landscape, and then you put rocks in the front, and you can create a vista inside of a studio. Not everyone has figured out how to use that well yet, and there are movies and shows where it looks dreadful, and it's just clearly they're in a round room with a big screen, and it just doesn't look right at all. The space just doesn't flow. And then there are movies like The Batman, which use it quite copiously. They use the volume a lot in The Batman, and it looks amazing, and you wouldn't know it, you know, because someone very talented did it. The same thing we have here, which is like Jurassic Park pioneers, well, several things: The Abyss, Terminator 2, Jurassic Park. There's a lineage, but you get to this point and everyone's trying to use it in their movies, but not everyone has quite figured out how to make it work right yet. And I think what's happening here is, on the headline thought is, I do think mostly this does work because they've CGI'd alongside puppetry. So the actors had something to work around. There was something physical moving on set. Sometimes that thing is entirely replaced with CGI, and that is, I think, when it falters slightly. Mostly in the textures, to be honest with you. I think they blend into the world well enough. They don't have that floaty effect because they're animating over a physical thing that was there. But it's it's like the texture looks rubbery in a way that doesn't seem convincing. When you see the physical toy versus the CGI version of the toy, there's a texture difference, and I just don't think computers were quite up to that yet. So yeah, there's a few elements of like they weren't quite sure how to use it yet, when to use it. So there's definitely holes. There are points when I was like, "Whoa, that looks rough," but the original plan I think was significantly worse. The original plan, the original plan was to go pure puppet, but not on set. Pure puppet on green screen, and then composite them into the image with the actors. But that would have meant the actors acted against nothing. That would have meant there was no sense of the weight on the set or the movement on the set. The camera work would have had to have been lined up perfectly. It would have been dreadful, in my opinion. It was the wrong approach. And thankfully, about a week into production, Dante realised this and scrapped that plan and went for the puppets on set. Much smarter, because then the movie holds up a lot better. So yeah, it's a problem in places, but I would say it doesn't 100% hold up, but I think considering the time, they did a reasonably good job, and I think a lot of that is to do with having puppetry, and quite a lot of puppetry, for at least even in the scenes where they're completely removed, even just for the actors' benefit, it becomes more believable. And then for the animators' benefit, because they have lighting references, because they can see the light bouncing off the puppet on set when they're then animating it. So it really does help make it blend. And I think on the whole they got away with it. So yeah, it's a complicated one, this movie, because it's right in this middle ground where it was like they were still sussing it out. But did you find yourself looking at any of the shots of being like, that's ugly, or that's not there in real life?
No, not at all. No, to be fair. And actually I thought some of the sort of like, you know, the shot of when he first breaks out of the packaging and all of that sort of stuff, I thought looked quite effective and quite good. So no, I didn't butt up against that at all, to be honest. It felt very of its time to me as a novice. You know, it felt very Ants, A Bug's Life, early Toy Story.
Yeah.
But it was like it was made around that time. So. Yeah, I had no issues with it. I was just curious because you pick up on like lighting and depositing and stuff like that way more than I do. So I was curious to get your view.
Yeah, no, I think that's I don't know why. I think it's years of watching, like when I was a kid, watching all the like the DVD extras and seeing how they would do stuff. Sort of fostered an interest in filmmaking for me. And I did my college course before I chose screenwriting was a film production and filmmaking course. So I've always had more of a of the two of us, I think, because you went into screenwriting, you wanted to be storytelling was your vibe, and I, even though I went into screenwriting because that was my favorite part of the process, I had done a fair bit of like production-y stuff. So I don't think there's many movies I watch where I'm not like, how did they do that? How they do that? I want. How did they get the
I
camera
remember
there?
we had a guy come in. He wrote quite a well-known book about filmmaking. And it was a room
Are we
full of
are we
people.
deliberately not naming it?
As we can do, because he did nothing wrong. He actually gave a very interesting, fascinating lecture to a room of people, much to your increasing frustration, that didn't really care and were a bit like, why are we here? This is weird. And I think it's partly because he'd not been teed up and introduced. We'd not been told what it was. It was like a slot that was always something random. And everyone was like, who's this guy? Apart from Dan, who knew him and adored him and was right. Dan was on the right side of this, absolutely.
Yeah.
And over the course of the lecture, I was like, oh, okay, I'm understanding what this is now.
Yeah.
But yeah, some people were just rude. And you could tell the guy was like, what the fuck's happening here? Like, this is usually way more effective.
So this is Chris Jones, who wrote the with someone else, actually, Genevieve something, Genevieve Joliffe, who they put together a book called The Guerrilla Filmmaker's Handbook, which was about making films on low budget, and we were on a screenwriting course. And they'd obviously thought it'd be a good idea to bring him in and talk about the filmmaking process. But of course, 90% of the people on our course were not interested in what he had to say, because they were like, I want to sit behind a computer and type, which is absolutely valid. It was a mismatch, really, of the lecturer and the course we were on, I suppose, to some degree. But I found it very interesting, and I couldn't believe. I was thrilled they got him, because I owned that book. Like, I already had that book, and then the author of it was a surprise lecturer on our course. So I was having a great time, and I do remember being frustrated at everyone else's like lack of interest in what he was saying, because I was like, at least have the just be respectful and just like listen. Like, it's okay. You don't think this is valuable to you? At least like act like you're listening. Like, let's not be basically rude to the guy as an audience.
Yeah, there were a lot of people being rude, definitely, and a lot of people giving him sass of like, well, we do the writing, and it's like, fucking hell, guys, it's not his fault.
Yeah,
it's no more his fault than ours.
And like not listening in like an active way. Like, they were like deliberately like, you know, like looking at like, maybe not phones, but like, you know, they were like doodling or like just clearly not paying attention in ways that were really over and like we're not particularly nice. But I remember enjoying that lecture. It was good.
I've just looked him up. He was he directed some Splinter units on Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning and The Final Reckoning. That's cool.
There you go. Yeah, no, he's great. He's really very talented. Like I said, it was a good book. It was I mean, I don't know how much of it is still valid, because a lot of it, not all of it, but there were parts of that book that were about like how you can find locations that don't need permits, and you know, some of it was like about how to get around not having a studio behind you and to find a good location where you wouldn't necessarily need to go through like loads of processes and stuff, and you know, just other practical things about getting in and getting out and getting stuff shot. But I imagine a lot of the laws around that sort of stuff has changed now as well. So there'll definitely be parts of that handbook that are not relevant today. But it was a great book. I had a copy. If I'd have brought it in that day, Chris, I'd have had him sign it.
Yeah, well, we didn't. That's the thing. We didn't know, did we?
No, we didn't
know.
Anyway, yeah.
Back to Small Soldiers. Not a good movie.
Yeah, so I think we've already covered that you because usually this is the point when I go, you know, Chris has asked me about the visual effects. Now I'm going to be like, Chris, you're our love story guy, but we've already covered that and it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all.
No.
And I think it's a shame because, like I say, I think Kirsten Dunst especially is doing a lot with a little in that regard. I think you know what? The more I think about it, the more I think like it's pick a specific lane and make it that. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Make it a live action cartoon. Or make it a horror movie for kids, and I assume we'll talk more in the triv about the studio sort of stripping some elements back and stuff like that. Yeah,
there's not a huge stuff for that because a lot of the time, like these guys, they won't talk about the reality. But Joe Dante's hinted, and we'll talk about that. But one thing I do say as well is there is I feel like the movie is going to do a bunch of commentary on because it is it's an inherently ridiculous but satirical idea that someone who manufactures military weapons would be expanding into the food industry, the toy industry, all these other industries they name that they're like expanding into. That is like hilarious. And the idea that military technology ends up in toys, it's ripe for like some satire or some political commentary or something, but it does not. It just doesn't do anything with it. It's like the idea is there in name only.
On that, actually, there's something else on that. So yes, that's another way. That's another genre, isn't it? Like making a political point.
Yeah,
which they
doing
could
some level of
increase.
satire. Yeah.
Yeah. There is actually one other thing I did want to talk about. The subvert, because I think this is one of those difficult films where, because it's kind of essentially, there's not too much to say, but the subversion of it I thought was interesting and good. So the villains in the toy world are the good guys in the human world, and to the movie, the villains are the heroes, and the heroes the commander. Which again, I think you could push further and either make it all about looks can be deceptive. Not that particularly the lead toy that we deal with. Alan, is it his name? Alan
Archer.
No, the one that
Oh, the lead boy.
Archer.
The lead boy
No,
is called Alan.
Archer.
The lead character.
Yeah, sorry, I meant Archer.
Yeah.
Not that you look at Archer and go, I'm not sure I buy that you're that you're meant to be the villain of the piece, but okay, as in the villain of the toy world. But you could, looks can be deceptive, or people that you think are villainous can actually be the good guys. Again, it's another example of an angle they could have pushed further, or the people that look like they're going to protect are actually not going to protect. Let's add, sort of like you say, either a political piece or either about corporate or about heroes and villains in there as to what this film could have done. But even though they didn't push it as far as they could have, I did think that was a fun idea, and I did think that was an interesting idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I did think, again, like I said about something else earlier, a commendable idea that just isn't necessarily executed, in my opinion, to its full potential.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's a really good point as well. That like we've sort of done the soldiers are the bad guys, and that is there's something in that, and that isn't touched upon either. Not, I want people who maybe have seen the movie will be like, "What do you mean it's not touched upon?" It's like part of the movie. They're soldiers, and they're trying. And at the beginning of the movie, it's a toy company that doesn't want to make toys like that, and also very specifically, they mentioned that the main kid's dad doesn't want army toys, military toys in his store. There's a difference between mentioning an idea and exploring an idea, is I guess what I'm getting at here. Because for anyone going, well, they do mention that comes up. No one ever actually the movie doesn't do anything with that. It just happens to be part of the texture of the movie, and that the dad doesn't want the toy soldiers. He doesn't want military toys. He doesn't want high tech toys in his store. He doesn't want things that shoot. That's basically it. No one learns anything related to that. No one changes their ways as a result of that. It's not like the guy from the company lands at the end and goes, "Look at the damage we've done with just our toys. What are our weapons doing abroad?" It's not like anyone learns anything related to that. The movie doesn't discuss it in any detail other than pointing out that's a thing. Militarization's bad. Cool. I guess that's an opinion.
Yeah, exactly. It's an opinion, not a plot point or a story point.
Yeah, right. I will say, actually, very quickly though, the designs of the toys, both sides, are really cool. I just flat out say, from a toy perspective, even the Gorgonites that aren't supposed to be quote unquote cool look cool, in my opinion. Archer is designed to be sort of like a cool, arrow flinging, although he never does that in the movie. But he's got he's called Archer. He has a thing on his back with arrows sticking out of it. He has a little crossbow on his arm, which he loses super early in the movie and then never uses. But it's a cool, sleek design. You could imagine him sort of jumping between trees and out in nature on planet Gorgon doing cool stuff. And the soldiers are all really cool as well. They've got sort of like a commando sort of vibe, that 80s muscle men army vibe, So yeah, I think there's something to be said about the way that they were all designed. I think they look good. So yeah. I was so the middle point of the movie has the plot point of Kirsten Dunst being kidnapped, which we've already said we didn't find particularly believable. But I would say that might be one of the better sequences in the movie, though, because despite its lack of believability, it's got the clearest stakes. And I like that the kid sort of tricks his way into getting into the house because he has to use his brain to do it. So like he does the box with the radio in it. Yeah. Which has the voices of the Gorgonites. So all the soldiers think they're in there. They go to the box. They blow it up, but it turns out they weren't in there. And while they were doing that, he was inside, quote unquote, rescuing Kirsten Dunst, although she was rescuing him. So yeah, I liked that moment. I thought that sequence was reasonably well put together, even though it's not an action sequence. It had a bit of tension to it, like believable tension.
Yeah, I think so, and also, a clever way of bringing her in, and them being like, right, we've got a route to the kid through her, and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, although I will say they do let that scene down slightly with the way they start it. So part of the tension of that scene is you do think there's a chance, or you're supposed to think there's a chance the kid is going to give up the Gorgonites, because what are they to him? Just toys, like. For Kirsten Dunst, a person, and not only a person, but a person he happens to be, into. The problem is that sequence starts with him turning to the Gorgonites and saying, if he wants a war, we're going to give him a war, very much implying he's going to fight back. So you start the scene with that and then show the kid giving up the Gorgonites. I'm not going to believe that he's really doing that. Just a little note to the scriptwriter on that one.
Well, I think there's a lot of notes to the script, isn't there?
Yeah, that's true. Actually, can we head to Nitpick Corner? I've got 2 points in Nitpick Corner.
Let's get on our soldier boots and head there, man.
let's get in our tanks and drive to Nitpick Corner. You might be thinking, hey Dan, wouldn't it be deeply unnecessary to go to a street corner in a tank? Yes, it would be. That's political satire. Sorry you didn't get it.
What's the matter? Not edgy enough for you?
That's a very specific reference. That's good. People should watch James Acaster. Anyway, Nitpick Corner. So 2 things. One is absolutely tiny, and one is just a thing that bugged me the entire movie. And some might say it's not a nitpick. So the first one, you wouldn't 3D print the entire outer shell of the thing standing up in its shape to then take it apart and cover an exoskeleton in it. That's not how you would manufacture a toy like that. The pieces would be, even if you were 3D printing them, you'd be 3D printing them in sections that could be assembled around the exoskeleton, not as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, it was mad. That entire sequence, you just went, it's very early, like, for you to be thinking, oh, fucking hell. Well, that's just madness, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't work. Doesn't work at all. And I get it. It's a cool visual seeing them being 3D printed in their final shape. But you then show us the exoskeleton, and then you show us the bits being attached to the exoskeleton. But where did the bits come from? Because it was 3D printed as like a whole. Did you hollow that out? I don't understand. Anyway, so that doesn't work. But fine. It's a cool visual. And I guess people didn't really understand 3D printing back then. It's a bit like when, I can't remember who, but there's a pop singer from the 90s who, in her music video, was annoyed that her boyfriend wasn't texting her back. And she writes him a message saying that in Excel.
That is Nelly featuring Kelly Rowland. Dilemma.
Dilemma, there you go. So I guess people just didn't understand. Like, people wouldn't have understood how 3D printing works to know that wouldn't function. So I guess it's fine. The same way that it was years later, people were like, "Yeah, she was typing messages to that guy in Excel. No wonder he wasn't replying." Anyway, sorry. The second nitpick, Chris, and this one is a more serious one, I think. The fast spinning Gorgonite. the physics-defying Gorgonite that spins like the Tasmanian devil.
Oh, I thought you meant the guy spinning in the trash compactor, but no, you mean the Taz style one.
Yeah. What military equipment allows him to break the laws of physics?
I don't know.
How does he spin up that quickly? What technology has he got to get that much momentum that suddenly? Like, he's like the Flash. He's like a blur. He's not got superpowers, he's a toy.
I was going to be like... Excuse me. I was going to be like alien powers, but he's not actually an alien, is he?
He's a fucking toy made by David Cross and Jay Moore.
Yeah.
Two people I've never been less convinced as people that design things, by the way. I love both those actors, but neither of them convinced me they were capable of designing these robots.
No, David Cross. I know we've already mentioned him, but David Cross is another one where it's a great actor doing a lot with a little.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So yeah, I don't know. That was just me. Like, yeah. Speaking of physics defying, actually, very last one in Nitpick Corner, just very quickly. There's a bit when they're on a scooter and they jump through the air, and it looks absolutely fucking ridiculous. The scooter goes like a mile in the air. They did not have the momentum to do that. It looks ridiculous. It just keeps going and keeps going with forward momentum, but in the air. I'm like, that thing would have hit the ground like a meter after the ramp you hit. Like, there's no way it would zoom across the screen, left to right, about a foot off the ground. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. This movie apparently exists in a world where physics just not a thing. Anyway, right. I did write in my notes. I've just noticed Phil Hartman plays such a brilliant cunt.
He's brilliant. He's amazing.
Yeah. Very quick notes there. Unless you have anything else you want to add, I'll just finish up some notes I had, and then we'll get into
No, not at all.
The Spice Girls needle drop is brilliant. That's genius. One of my favorite moments of the movie. It's so unexpected. Just incredible. And then the claim that it's like a torture device, but then the mum is like, I love this song. That was just mwah. That scene's great. I do enjoy that the Gorgonites fight back in the end. That's more exciting to me than the humans fighting. And I really like that Archer knows he can't win, so instead uses his moment up on the power pole to tell the kid, to remind the kid that Chip Hazard is made of metal. That's just Archer's contribution to the success. I enjoyed that. I thought that was good.
Yeah, I like that too.
I did think it's funny that the company just pays everyone off in the end. But oh god, sorry, Chris. Can we hop back in the tank? I've got one more nitpick.
I'm in there. I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Globotech show up, right? Their toys, the products they've made, ran amok with military technology in them, right? They show up and they're like, we're going to pay to repair everything. And you're like, okay, cool. And then we cut to what seems to be later that day or the next day, and we've got the kid outside with a trash bag picking up the toy robots, the toy soldiers, the small soldiers that have been destroyed from the EMP. Did Globotech not want to clean that up, that proprietary technology? Is that, if someone gets hold of that, I know it's been EMP'd, but couldn't you reverse engineer that? Isn't that bad? You wouldn't want your competitor to get this technology, no? Why is the kid cleaning it up?
Dan?
Why the fuck is the kid cleaning it up?
You'd think not.
And all they would have needed to do was show him just picking up rubble. Like, I believe they'd not bother cleaning up the house. I totally believe that.
Like you say, cleaning up the remnants of the house, or
maybe like the fence has been smashed, and he's just picking up the pieces and putting them in a wheelbarrow or something, and then he notices the satellite dish that's downed. Like, why show him picking up the toys? It's so fucking insane. I felt like I was going crazy with that scene, Chris. Because
no, it's fair.
What were all the Globotech guys doing then at the scene if they weren't cleaning up?
It's unless my only hope is that he's about to hand that bag to someone.
Madness. Speaking of actually that last scene, I do really like. We didn't talk about this, but I do really like that they survived by hiding the Gorgonites, and I like that they get in the boat and get to have their happy ending. That's a nice
and
moment.
Explore the world. Yeah, and that's set up nicely when they're like, that weird scene previously when they're like, and what's beyond that? The freeway. And what's beyond that?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think as well, I also like the happy ending for Jay Moore and David Cross's characters, where they're like, "What do you mean you're fat? No, we'll just sell these to the military."
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Okay. That's a good scene. All right. I don't have anything more to say about this movie. I think it's a miracle we stretched it out this far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Shall I do the thing?
Let's do the thing, Chris.
Let's triv it up!
I'm going to give you some trivia. So, on making the movie, director Joe Dante recalled, and this is the quote, "Originally, I was told to make an edgy picture for teenagers. But when the sponsor tie-ins came in, the new mandate was to soften it up as a kiddie movie. Too late, as it turned out, and there are elements of both approaches in the final film. Just before it released, it was purged of lots of action explosions." So, specifically, I've looked into what the tie-ins were. It looked like there was a big Burger King deal. They made a bunch of toys. Obviously, you're not selling toys to teenagers. That's the reality of this, is that they were like, whatever happens with this movie, we can sell toys, but only if the movie is appropriate for children. If the movie is aimed at teenagers, sort of a Gremlins demographic maybe, then you're not selling those people the merch. So, looks like the studio stepped in. There's not a huge amount more on that topic, but it does make a lot of sense of what the final product is, in my opinion.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, no. Like that totally tracks.
Yeah, very much so. So Joe Dante also originally wanted, and this, I love this so much, he wanted the original cast of Predator to voice the entire Commando Elite. He wanted Schwarzenegger for Chip Hazard. He wanted Shane Black to voice Kip Callaghan, Carl Weathers to voice Butch Meathook. That's that character's name. Jesse Ventura to come back as Brick Bazooka. Sonny Landon would have been Nick Nitro, and Bill Duke would have been Link Static. But sadly, they couldn't make that work. I'm gonna presume the bigger problem there was Arnie and Carl Weathers, who are both very successful and like movie star level, and probably wouldn't have been willing to take such a small amount to do the movie, because the movie didn't have a huge budget. We'll talk about that later, but I suspect their agents will have backed that away maybe even before either of them saw the script. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. So instead, with the exception of Chip Hazard, who they obviously gave to Tommy Lee Jones, they cast 5 people who'd been in the Dirty Dozen instead. So it's Ernest Borgnine, Jim Brown, Clint Walker, George Kennedy, and originally Richard Jekyll. But sadly, Jekyll died during principal photography, so the role of Link Static then went to Bruce Dern. But the credits of the movie say, the commandos voiced by the cast of the Dirty Dozen.
That's cool,
which is very nice. One of the Dirty Dozen, and probably the most prominent member of the Dirty Dozen, not present, Charles Bronson, who refused to lend his voice to the movie. So, yeah. That's the difference, I guess, because with the Predator cast, you need to get all of them, or you don't have enough voices for your soldiers. Whereas the Dirty Dozen, the clue is in the name, everyone. There is a dozen, which made it easier to get 6 of the 12 to come over. Now, they did something similar for the Gorgonites, Chris. As credited, the Gorgonites are voiced by Spinal Tap.
Sorry, I did not know that.
Which is technically true. So, with the exception of Archer, the same way Chip Hazard is the exception, the entire rest of the Gorgonites are voiced by Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, and Harry Shearer, otherwise known as Spinal Tap.
This fucking cast is insane.
Yeah. And what's crazy about that is, it's not just that they've assembled the Spinal Tap cast and then said Christopher Guest voiced this character. They literally say in the credits, the same way they say the soldiers voiced by the Dirty Dozen and then list the names, the voiced by Spinal Tap and then list the names. It's genius. It's very fun. Yeah. So there weren't a lot of like alternate castings, if I'm being completely honest with you. Let me just double check actually who this character is. Larry Benson. Which one is Larry Benson? Oh, that's Jay Moore's character. So there's only alternate casting for 2 characters that we were aware of, which is interesting. One of them is Gil Mars, who is obviously the, for those who don't remember, the Dennis Leary role. He's the owner of the tech company that caused all this. And honestly, I don't think it matters who played this role because it's such a small part of the movie. Like, he's not in every scene or anything, so it wouldn't have made a big difference whoever they cast. And they did go to some big names. So Kevin Bacon, Patrick Swayze, Tim Allen, and Jeff Goldblum were all considered for that role. Look, Dennis Leary does a great job. So it's not a big enough role that I'd be like, oh, if only. You know, there's no name on there that I'm like, that would have made the movie much better. I can see one name on that list that would have made the movie much worse, I actually think, to be honest with you.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, not a big deal. Larry Benson, which is Jay Moore's character, the sort of counterpart to David Cross's character. There were some alternate castings for that. Chris's true love, Tim Robbins, was one of the options. Then he's a
good-looking man.
He's a very good-looking man. Mel Gibson, Jerry Seinfeld, Kurt Russell, Brad Pitt, Greg Kinnear, and George Clooney. Imagine George Clooney. I mean, I guess this is... Wait, what year is this for George Clooney? Because that seems like way too small a role for George Clooney to have done. Wait, when is ER a big thing?
Yeah, but you feel a bit like that with Kirsten Dunst, though, don't you? You're like, oh, this is like middle ground in between the movies she did really young and the movies she did as an adult. That's weird.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely.
I was surprised to see Kirsten Dunst in this movie because I just assumed at this point she was like still a kid, which I suppose she's a teenager in this, so that makes, I guess. That's it. I've seen movies where she was a really young kid and movies where she was like a young adult. Mm-hmm. I've never seen a teenage Kirsten Dunst movie, right. And I just assumed they didn't exist. I assumed she went from child actor to adult actor, and which just is, in between did her exams or something.
Which is realistically just not how aging works.
No, I know.
So I mean, Clooney's potentially still on ER at this point, maybe. So maybe he's not the big name at the point they filmed this, 97. That would have been so insane. But yeah, I mean, Jerry Seinfeld makes sense to me because it's kind of a comedic role. But Brad Pitt and George Clooney, imagine.
Yeah, that's mad.
Imagine if either of them had this movie on their CV.
Absolute madness.
So, with at least 3 puppets per character, plus additional insert versions, Stan Winston's studio ended up building more than 200 puppets for this movie in just 4 months. In building the puppets, the studio had only recently been working with 20-foot-tall T-Rexes and large-scale hydraulics for the second Jurassic Park movie, and they suddenly found themselves matching, tiny watch-sized so it says matching, but I think it means making tiny watch-sized mechanisms and fitting them into 12-inch tall bodies. So it was quite a scaling down for Stan Winston's guys. And for those who aren't familiar, Stan Winston, legendary visual effects makeup artist, worked on every great-looking movie you ever saw. He had a great time working on this. We'll talk about him a little bit more in a bit, but he worked on like Aliens, Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, like all of the biggest touchstones of like visual effects movie making. Stan Winston was involved in them. So, one of the reasons this movie's visual effects are pretty good considering its budget. So we already talked about this, but there's a quote here, so I'll quickly cover it again. The original production plan was to shoot most of the live-action toy scenes with puppets on a blue screen rather than on the sets, and then Industrial Light and Magic would composite them into the final scenes, but shortly into production, Joe Dante abandoned the idea, preferring in-camera live-action approach with the toy puppets on the set interacting with the actors. He said, those of us who do this for a living are clearly people who don't want to grow up. This is actually a quote from Stan Winston. Apologies. Those of us who do this for a living are clearly people who don't want to grow up, said Winston, laughing. Some of us could have been doctors or lawyers, but instead we prefer to play with toys. We're all kids in men's bodies. We're all toy lovers. Who among us wouldn't want to go to work and play with cool action figures? Small Soldiers was a fantastic experience for all of us. Now, I'm going to say, and I don't know how quickly this will come back up again, but when I was reading, I don't know how much of it I put into the trivia I did, but when I was reading the trivia, the one recurring theme is that the guys working with the puppets and doing that filmmaking side of this fucking loved working on this movie. Loved it. They all had the best time. Like, it came up multiple times when I was doing my research for this. On the film's special effects, Joe Dante stated, "We are planning to use a lot of Stan Winston's puppets. He had made some very elaborate puppets and could do a lot of things, but in practice we found it was sometimes simpler and cheaper to let the CGI people do the work after we shot the scenes. So I would say the final film is 1/3 puppetry and the rest CGI, even though the original idea was to do mostly puppetry." So yeah, but again, and I say this, I've said this on modern films, I say this for this one as well. It's animating on top of something that was physically in the scene will lead to better animation. So whether the final product leans more CGI, it will be less noticeable if we're animating over a thing that was really there.
I agree. And I've really, like I said earlier, a lot of what I've learned about that in terms of like eye lines, lighting, etc., comes from you. But yeah, so in a way, of course, I would agree. Of course, I would agree with you. I'm basing my logic off of shit you've said, but I do agree.
Yeah, it's important, man. It is really important. I do think for believability, and I'm a big old nerd. That's what we're learning. One of the early issues that Stan Winston and his crew came across was the balance of how much to make the toys look like toys. Because there's an element of, well, these are supposed to be special magic, high-tech military toys. Do they have the limitations of a regular action figure, or have they used high-tech stuff to get past some of that? Can the character is the character allowed to move this way within the normal joints of a toy, basically? So determining whether they should look and act more like figures. I've got the quote here, actually. I should just read this instead of paraphrasing. The question was, said Winston, do we design with the same limitations we saw in real action figures on our characters, or do we go beyond those limitations to give them more life? We decided to create a really great performance. We had to give our characters a greater range of motion than a real toy. Our rationale was that they weren't just toys, they were the coolest toys ever. So, yeah, I agree, because I think they still kept them within a certain boundary, with the exception of the spinning Gorgonite. Their movements, while maybe a little bit outside of the usual articulation of a toy, were still restricted enough that I believed it, I think. So, yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Stan Winston said he learned a lot about the toy business during this because they had a close association with Hasbro throughout the making of the film, because Hasbro then, through Kenner, produced the toys that were produced after this movie. We found out what it really takes to make a great toy, to make it stand out on the shelf. We learned how the joints of toys worked, all the mechanics that go into them. The whole thing was an education, and we helped create a toy line that was extremely successful for Hasbro. In fact, ultimately, the sales for the Small Soldier toys outperformed the movie itself. Now,
wow.
I tried to verify this. Now, I don't think he's lying. I think he's exactly right. I'm sure he's been told that by someone at Hasbro, and that's 100% true. But Chris, did a deep dive to try and figure out if these toys really sold that well. Because at the end of this, I usually talk about the box office. And the box office for this movie, I'm going to tell you right now, Chris, wasn't amazing. I'll just clarify. So I was like, maybe it did make its money. Maybe this, and I can factor that in when I talk about it. I went as far as to finding actual financial documents Hasbro posted to their Hasbro's internal financial documents they shared with like investors, I guess, in 1998. I located some of these documents and I could see how much money they were making and how much money Kenner was making. Kenner being the subsidiary, I believe, that then produced the toys. Hasbro owns Kenner. That's just a brand name. But I could not get any specific data on Small Soldiers. It was that brand, Kenner, what they made that year, and that would include Small Soldiers, but it might also include, I don't know if Kenner still the label they put on the Barbie stuff. I don't know. Kenner for a while with the label that went on Star Wars stuff. I have no idea, unfortunately, despite my deep dive, how much money they made in toys. But if Stan Winston is to be believed, they made more money on the toys than they made on the film. So we'll come to that later, because I've got the figure for that. And when we do that, I want that to be in everyone's mind. So yeah. Robert Picardo filmed his cameo as Exposition Man between the 4th and 5th seasons of Star Trek Voyager, which is fun to know. Push through. Okay, yeah, so the Gorgonites were strongly influenced by He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. You can kind of tell the Commando Elite was strongly influenced by the G.I. Joe franchise. Yeah, which makes perfect sense. Irwin tells Larry that he was given the computer password Gizmo, a direct reference to Gremlins. And even funnier, when they're in the dumpster later, the Gorgonites, there's a little Gizmo toy next to them. You can see a little toy Gizmo in the bin. Keeping the Gremlins references alive, there is a skull on Alan's desk. It is a Gremlins skull directly from the set of one of those movies. I'm not sure which one, but one of them. The piranha next to Alan's computer is a reference to a film called Piranha from 1978, which is also directed by Joe Dante, a film I've never seen, but there you go. So a few little nods to Joe Dante's previous work. Oh, yeah, the music being played during the scene where they transform the Gwendy dolls into their soldier versions of them is the theme music from The Bride of Frankenstein from 1935. I thought that was pretty cool as a choice. Obviously, Chip Hazard addressing the troops in peering in front of the large flag is a big nod to the film Patent from 1970. So I believe Jerry Goldsmith, who did the music for this movie, also did the music for that movie and was able to borrow. But what I loved about that scene, we didn't talk about it, is if you look closely, not even that closely, but if you're just paying attention to it, the flag behind him is not a normal flag. It's a jigsaw of the American flag that's been put together.
Yeah, I spotted that. Yeah,
super fun, good detail. Let's see. Oh, the vehicles that the Commando Elites construct are obviously pretty heavily inspired by the vehicles in the Mad Max franchise. That also makes sense. The head of Globotech is named Gil Mars. Mars was the Roman god of war. So, not subtle. Now, obviously, for those of you who aren't aware, very tragically, Phil Hartman was murdered the year this came out. In fact, he was murdered just 2 months before the premiere. Which caused his character to not appear in any print ads, which didn't really feature many human characters anyway. But the film, I suspect you probably didn't get through the entire credits, Chris, because I can't imagine what reason you'd have had to.
Oh, God, no. I turned the film off I didn't even check. I'll be honest, I didn't even check there was an end credit scene like I usually do. The credits started and I was like, sweet.
So there is
that baby off.
There is a tiny, tiny thing of Phil on the set.
That's nice.
He does a line and he goes, "Is that too big? Did I go too far?" And then they're laughing because Phil Hartman never asks that because obviously he's got a very particularly bold, big acting style. So they're all having a chuckle. And then it fades.
I will go back and watch that then.
Yeah, it's only a few seconds long, but it is good. And it fades out. It just says "for Phil." So the movie is dedicated to his memory. Interestingly, though, he had 2 final roles because there's the final film role, which was this one. And then he had his final voiceover role, which was Kiki's Delivery Service, which was the Studio Ghibli film, both of which he starred alongside Kirsten Dunst. Because Kirsten is the voice, I believe, of Kiki in Kiki's Delivery Service. And also, weirdly, 4 years earlier, she'd played his niece in a movie called Greedy. So Kirsten Dunst and Phil Hartman had just sort of followed each other around for a bit, it seems. But yeah, one of those things. So yeah, very sad, obviously. I do recommend people look into the story of Phil Hartman, because the murder itself is actually even more tragic in the circumstances in which we lost him. Just, yeah, there is no justice in the world. Anyway. So the original promotional artwork for this movie had Chip Hazard pointing a gun sideways, sort of outward at the viewer. This artwork was altered, removing the gun. So if you look at the poster, you sort of see his hand coming out, but it's empty. It's like he's reaching out, but it's because they've removed the gun. Although the actual unaltered artwork does appear in the movie as a cardboard cutout that the kid uses as the store display. So yeah, that's, you can still see it if you want to see it. Here we go, budget time. The original movie, Chris, had $40 million budget. So actually not massively off what they spent to make the Flintstones. That's funny, isn't it? The Flintstones only cost $6 million more. Which movie would you have guessed cost more money?
Well, this one I would have guessed, I think.
Yeah, 40 million. 6 million less. It's crazy that they're close, though. Especially because the Flintstones has all those sets. You'd think, like, maybe. I don't know. Interesting. Didn't quite do as well in the box office, though, because Flintstones on a similar budget made, like, it was 370 million, I think. This made 71 million, which, if people remember the movie maths we talk about, which is you always double the budget to cover marketing. So $40 million budget means they spent $80 million on this movie. It made $71 million. Now, I want to just keep reminders of what we said earlier. They made more in toys than the movie grossed, which means they made more than 71 million in toy sales.
Do you think because of that there must have been some talk of a sequel based on that alone?
It's funny you should say that, Chris. Because Alex Montemayor, I believe was one of the writers on this movie. Let me double check that is actually correct, because oh no, he's not. Who's that guy then? 1 second. I'm going to look up who he is. Cinematographer. Okay. So he has said that they were working on a follow-up sequel to this film, but production hit a standstill after numerous attempts to reach Tommy Lee Jones through fax failed.
Essentially suggesting Tommy Lee Jones was not interested.
Yes. Look, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say Tommy Lee Jones doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that would, want to do a project like this. In general. I'm surprised he even did the first one. You know what I mean? So the idea of him coming back for a sequel feels like yeah. But there is some stuff here about... so it looks like... So this is interesting. So there was a remake that got cancelled as well. So yeah, there have been multiple attempts to keep this going as a franchise. Basically, a remake of Small Soldiers was in development at 20th Century Fox called Toymageddon. The script was purchased in January 2014, and Justin Lin of the Fast and Furious franchise was set to produce the film. The story was described as set in a toy factory that begins to run amok, and at the time, it was not explicitly stated to be a remake of Small Soldiers. But when Disney acquired Fox in March 2019, they officially cancelled the film along with 200 other projects. And the documentation that came out around that cancellation revealed it had indeed been intended as a remake or pseudo, sequel to Small Soldiers. So there was a movie that was going to happen that wasn't even a direct sequel, but more of a soft reboot that Fox were working on that never quite got off the ground before Disney stepped in. So that's interesting.
Fair play.
Yeah. This movie did also, I should say very quickly, because people are going to go, you didn't mention this. There was, again, some controversy about kids' toys, about a movie this dark, as there always is with these kinds of movies. Like the Burger King toys were a slight problem. And then there was I'm not going to go into the details, but there was a grisly shooting that happened. And the guy that committed the shooting, his name was very similar to the name of one of the soldiers in this. It was Kip something. It was Kip Killerman, and the guy in this was called Kip something or other. Very similar, basically, just a few letters out. So that toy got pulled from Burger King. It got pulled. Burger King just kind completely pulled that toy, which makes sense. But yeah, that's just one of those things. All right, Chris. With all that in mind, it's time to do your favourite segment. It's Cars Exist. So, very quickly, the Abernathy's car is a 1975 Volkswagen convertible Super Beetle Type 1, as I'm sure you knew and excitedly reminded Jess.
Oh, absolutely. I was like, check this out. Well, I didn't. I would have done had I not. Jess was like, what have you got to watch for the podcast? And at that point, I'd started watching it, but I paused it and showed her the trailer to see if she wanted me to rewind and sit and watch it with me. A resounding no.
Yeah,
to that.
Understandable. Because I said to Nadia, I've got to, and I had already decided Nadia would not want to watch the movie with me, but I said to Nadia, I've got to watch the movie. She goes, which one? What are you watching? And I said, Small Soldiers. You went, oh yeah, no. I was like, yeah, I know. I'd already resigned myself to watching this one alone. But on that subject of the Abernathy's car, well, it's also time for Motorbikes Exist. Because Brad, oh, that was good. I liked your motorbike noise. Brad, the sort of douchey boyfriend guy, his motorcycle is a 1991 Honda Elite 80 motorbike. Good motorbike, I guess. But it gets better, Chris. We're doing a three-fer. It's the hat trick. It's Choppers Exist.
Very similar to my motorbike noise.
Yeah.
But there we go.
Well, I liked both, so it's all good. Gil Mars, the head of the company, his helicopter is an AS350D A-Star, which obviously Chris and I both immediately knew and recognised.
I text you those exact words, I believe.
And I got to tell you, Chris, none of this information came from the Internet Movie Car Database. This was all just in the IMDb trivia. People just thought it was relevant.
Fair play.
Yeah. So it's time. It's time, Chris, to do the age-old thing of going, hey, Chris. Psst. Hey, Chris. Where are we going? Where are we going next week? In our tanks.
And here's the thing, Dan. I don't think you're going to be able to predict this one. If I gave you enough hints, you would. So I'm not going to do any build-up. I'm just going to say it. Next week, we're doing Stop or My Mum Will Shoot.
No, I couldn't have predicted that. I do like that film, or I liked that film.
Yep.
I mean, a whole movie based around one gag was my memory.
Yeah, I remember enjoying it as a kid. Never seen it as an adult, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, but fit the kind of classic rewind reviews and just sometimes you just randomly think of a movie and go, fuck it, let's do that.
Oh, that presents me with an interesting. Because basically, like I was, I think there is a bit of a gap. So if we're doing a classic season, we've done some.
Oh, you don't have to. That was my thing. We never. Don't worry, you don't.
No.
I
know, but I'd had two movies in mind that we could cover next week, the week after. Sorry, my next choice before we do the X-Men trilogy. I have one choice left basically before the series ends, and I had two ways that was going to go, and it was very much with your choice sort of dictating it, because there's the two genres we've yet to hit that you think like, or not genres, but types of movies we cover in a traditional season that we haven't yet covered. And I had to choose between the two, and I thought, well, maybe Chris will choose one of those this week. And I guess I'll say, like, I'll lay out the two. I won't tell you the movie choices, but I'll tell you the two sort of types of movie. A full-on old school classic, like a movie from like the 40s, 50s onwards, like like a proper, like, we haven't done one of those yet, which is something we do every now and then, which I have one in mind that I thought would be fun, or a full on like 90s like action movie, like a cheesy, like, I'm trying to think, like, Nick Cage, Keanu Reeves, that kind of, like, was it Christian Slater? Like, Christian Slater, John Travolta, Broken Arrow, that kind of, you know what I mean? Those kind of like slick 90s action movies. And I had a choice for that too. So now I don't know what to do, because Stop My Mom Will Shoot does not fall into either category. So that has not eliminated one.
The filmmakers would probably say it's a 90s action movie, but
they would be wrong.
I'm not sure it will be.
Mate, they would be wrong. My memory of that movie is that it is a comedy, a full-on like outright comedy.
Yeah, I think, it is. It is a comedy, I believe. I don't know. I've not seen it. I have such little. I remember seeing it. I remember enjoying it. I think we might have recorded it.
Yeah, I think that's how I saw it
next week. And in terms. Huh? Yeah,
I remember a couple of different scenes from that movie. One of my favorites, if I'm misremembering, we'll find out. But one of my favorites is that she cleans his gun. She's like, your gun is filthy.
Yeah,
so she cleans his gun, and then it doesn't work because you shouldn't get a gun wet, or you certainly shouldn't scrub off the coating. I think that's dangerous for a gun. So yeah, I think that's
and I can really picture the final sort of gun fight scene as well. I can really picture that clearly. But yeah, it's I just thought of it, and then I toyed with other things like you. I toyed with, well, what have we not done this year? And I nearly picked a we've not done in a while, like I'll name it. We will get it at some point, but like a Stand By Me. I nearly picked Stand By Me, like a prestige, like older film, kind of like what you were saying. And but in the end I was like, you know what? Fuck it, stop on my mum will shoot.
Yeah, I feel like we've created a run of not good movies now, though. Because what was it we did? We did what was the last good movie we did? Like, really, Muppets Christmas Carol?
It's not been a great series for good movies.
Holy shit! No, is there any actual classic good movie we've done?
Well, a lot of people. Well, the two
Muppet
Christmas ones,
Carol.
Although we weren't as keen on Home Alone, but yeah, Muppets Christmas Carol is easily the best movie we've done this season.
Oh my
and the fact that that's not even a debate when it usually would be says a lot about the quality of films.
Yeah, because Jack, the cable guy, the Flintstones, Small Soldiers, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. This has been the shit season. That's what this has been. Right. I have a lot of pressure now. I feel like I either need to commit to shit and choose a really bad movie, or I need to find something really good. Like an actual classic.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we got X-Men: The Last Stand coming, admittedly, but X2 is very renowned.
Yeah, the first one, if memory serves, is pretty good too. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. All right, well, we'll see how we go. Oh man, I've got a choice to make. Yeah, because I think sort of like an action movie. I'm thinking like like something in the range of like a Die Hard or something. But for a classic movie, like God, there's a few fun choices, the older choices. So I gotta have a think. But yeah, in terms of your next choice, I am very excited. For those who don't know, there's an amazing piece of trivia about Stop My Mom Will Shoot. One of maybe the greatest pieces of trivia in the history of film, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Okay, great. I don't think I know that, so that's fun.
Don't look into the movie at all. It's amazing. It's so good. It is one of my favorite things. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. You can get us in all the usual places. nothingbutstatic.co.uk. Nope. Mail at nothingbutstatic.co.uk if you've got thoughts. Patreon.com/nothingbutstatic if you want to support us. As little as $1 a month gets you episodes of this a week early. If you're desperate to hear us talk about Stop My Mom Will Shoot right now, you can indeed do. And at the end of that episode, I'll be choosing the next one. So if you want to know what I choose for the one after it right now, you could get on Patreon, get to the Stop My Mom Will Shoot episode, and then skip to the end to hear what I've chosen for the week after. It's a very exciting time. Following that, we're going to do the X-Men trilogy, the original X-Men trilogy, including Last Stand, which exists. So yeah, it's going to be.
I'm excited about. I've never seen The Last Stand. I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe it'll be better than I remember, but I
don't think that's going to be the case.
My memory is coming out of the cinema extremely disappointed. Not happy. So that's everything. I'll hand over to Chris because Chris ends this.
My name's Chris Billingham.
My name's Dan Dillon.
And this review has been rewound.